lining of standard metal caskets and vaults with lead sheeting resulted in final gamma readings at the outer surfaces of the vaults not exceeding 300 milliroentgens per hour generally. This was sufficiently low to permit shipment. On January 13th, the bodies were released to the Department of Defense, which then arranged for burial services in accordance with wishes of the families at private and national cemeteries. This completed phase 1 of the SL-1 operations. Starting with a mock-up of the reactor building at a nearby fire station training tower, phase 2 of the SL-1 incident operations concentrated on determining if the reactor was in fact nuclearly safe. That is, that it would not undergo another chain reaction. Up to this point, emergency operations had been carried out by the AEC. On January 13th, the responsibility for determining the condition of the reactor was turned over to the operating contractor. Proposals from Combustion Engineering were approved by IDO for remote control viewing of the reactor tophead and the interior of the reactor vessel, using both motion picture and television cameras on the end of a cherry picker crane. These remote-controlled operations made it possible to avoid further personnel entries for the next 5 months, or until June 2nd. The mock-up operations also made it possible to perfect techniques for placement and operation of cameras and probes. It was hoped that the pictures not only would affirm that a second nuclear excursion could not occur, but also disclosed what initiated the accident. After several days of rehearsal, the first entry into the reactor building was attempted. Equipment attached to the boom of the crane was maneuvered inside the reactor operating room through the freight doors by personnel operating the crane from a lead-shielded cab. The crane operator was guided by observers who could see directly into the reactor operating floor from a 30-foot tower 200 feet away. With field glasses, every move could be closely spotted for the man on the ground. Thanks to this arrangement and the extensive mock-up training, the equipment was successfully positioned. First films taken of the reactor head area showed that 6 nozzles were open to the atmosphere. Only one appeared to be completely free of obstructions. Films taken looking down through the nozzle openings revealed extensive damage to the visible part of the core and to the control rod shrouds. Control rod extensions still protruding up through the nozzles indicated that most of the control rod blades were still in the core region. The central rod blade appeared to be ejected from the core. Closed-circuit television cameras, specially fabricated for radiation resistance, also permitted remote-controlled observations. These were recorded on motion picture film in a canvas-enclosed truck. These lacked definition, but had greater flexibility. The operator could be instructed to hold on certain scenes or move more quickly to something else. The core appeared to be expanded radially, and at least one major hole appeared to be discernible. The center of the core was obscured from view. The tops of fuel elements were visible and appeared to be twisted, collapsed, and moved from their original position. All the control rod shrouds appeared to be partly collapsed. The outer shrouds were displaced toward the vessel wall. The central control shroud, number 9, appeared to have been partially ejected upward from the core. Other components appeared to be twisted, collapsed, and displaced. The films obtainable did not prove or disprove that the vessel might be cracked or otherwise damaged. Other photo entries were made with a shielded, remotely controlled miniature camera. It produced still pictures that had to be greatly enlarged, but more completely defined the condition and damage to the core. Contrary to earlier interpretations, the films did not verify that there was water in the vessel. Subsequently, chemical probes containing potassium permanganate crystals confirmed assumptions that the vessel was dry at the time of the measurement. Official conclusions eventually confirmed earlier indications that the reactor was nuclearly safe as long as nothing was done to change its unmoderated condition. The air temperature above the reactor head was 47 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the vessel, about 7 inches above the core, it was 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And at contact, presumably with debris on top of the core, it was 98 degrees Fahrenheit. First estimates of the radiation field in the reactor room were calculated to be approximately 1,000 R per hour. By late April, the radiation levels had decreased to the 200 R per hour range. Films from a pinhole camera spotted several locations and sources of high gamma radiation activity outside the reactor vessel, presumably from reactor components blown from the core by the force of the explosion. Calculations of the energy needed to cause the observed damage to the ceiling and the reactor indicate that the explosion was sufficient to create an internal pressure of at least 500 psi. From the presence of short-lived yttrium-91M, one of the daughters of strontium-91, found in clothing samples, the total fissions were estimated to be 1.5 times 10 to the 18th, or 1.5 billion fissions. These early calculations showed that the total energy released in the accident was at least 50 megawatt seconds. These levels are equivalent to the energy released by from 2 to 10 pounds of TNT. Beginning shortly after the accident, the SL-1 access road was regularly scanned for contamination tracked out by vehicles leaving the reactor area. Radiological crews cleaned up the hotspots. Wherever possible, vacuum cleaners were used to remove radioactive and other particulate material to the burial ground. In some instances, the activity was leached into the permeable soil with water hoses. In stubborn cases, it was necessary to seal the road surface with resin or neoprene sprays to prevent the spread of contamination. Some valuable lessons were learned early from the SL-1 experience. It is important to have high-range survey instruments that are readily available. These should range to 5,000 R per hour or greater. Special methods must be incorporated into pre-planning for handling highly contaminated and radioactive casualties. A movable lead shield with armholes permits close work with minimum exposures. Also, lead shielding jackets and full face masks to accommodate eyeglasses. Planning for around-the-clock field operations also pays off. It must be assumed that hundreds of personnel capable of performing a variety of tasks may be needed. For example, photographers were an important requirement. It may be necessary to rely on extensive support from operating and construction contractors, from other AEC installations, and from military organizations. An urgent need for the conservation of health physicists may arise. In the SL-1 operations, more than 80 health physicists were used to advantage during the first week. These were supported by more than 130 other personnel. Experience re-emphasized the importance of taking precautions to avoid unnecessary exposures where contamination and high radiation are involved. Although several hundred individuals participated, only 14 of the 100 persons active in the first 24 hours received radiation exposures of 5 or more Roentgens of gamma, and none more than 27 R. Subsequent medical checkups did not disclose any medical symptoms, and no one was hospitalized. The SL-1 accident had little or no adverse effects on the environment outside the immediate reactor area. Life went on as usual in surrounding communities. Repeated surveys and samplings of air, water, soil, vegetation, animals, and milk have revealed very little contamination above background levels. Prompt and factual release of information from the start alleviated public concern. With little public excitement and no sensationalism, a certain recognition was gained of the fact that hazards in the nuclear field, as with those of any other industry, can be dealt with effectively. Regrettable though the SL-1 accident was, out of it has come important information, both to reactor technology and to administrative procedures governing reactor development. Since the SL-1 was not operating at the time of the accident, the Commission's safety program for shutdown maintenance has benefited from the resulting reevaluation. Another constructive aspect was the containment of radioactive particulate matter by a building not designed for that purpose. At no time was there any serious hazard to people and animals, even in the close vicinity of the SL-1 site. This film on phases 1 and 2 of the SL-1 recovery operations was completed as phase 3 sought to determine what destroyed the reactor. Under contract with General Electric Company's Idaho staff, the work of decontamination and taking the reactor apart piece by piece went forward. It was a tediously slow process, extending into the following year. Various potential mechanisms that could have caused the excursion had to be explored. No unknown phenomenon was expected, however. This first fatal accident in 19 years of successful reactor operations activity has been thoroughly investigated from the start by several committees composed of nuclear experts and other scientists. The investigation will not be complete until continuing studies bring a fuller understanding of what was involved and what can be learned for the advancement of reactor safety technology.